Good evening, everyone. This is James Proctor, and I've got a special guest today. I've got Hollywood Wade. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, James. How are you?
Hey, doing really good. Wade's been here a couple of times before. Lee and I have interviewed Wade, and really, you had an interesting story and all of that. And the thing is, we'll talk about that a little bit, but I really wanted to get into your YouTube channel.
Right.
It's called Crime and Entertainment, and definitely recommend people checking it out. And you know, my first question is, can you tell people about the channel and the type of content that you're putting up?
Yeah. Well, it started kind of, like I said, there was a backstory to why this all started. I was charged with a crime, a pretty serious crime, and had to fight it. And we've covered that in y'all's back episodes. So if
Yeah,
people, maybe don't know my story, they can track back
sure.
and check that out. But, I was really bored. I was on house
Mhm.
arrest. And around the pandemic, I like a lot of people, decided to start a podcast. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do it on. I was thinking of true crime, and then there was just so many true crime podcasts. I'm like, man, it's gonna
Right.
be hard to find my way in this niche. I didn't know anything about it. I wasn't up to snuff on how people would go and file these Freedom of Information Acts and get all these good tidbits that really makes for a good story. So I was like, well, I'll just cover different things, like movie curses. And, I think one of the second episodes I ever did was the curse of the Poltergeist movies, how a lot of bad
Mhm.
stuff happened to a lot of people from the movie Poltergeist. And before we did that, though, the guy that I was doing it with originally, he was like, well, what all do you want to do? And I'm like, man, I want to talk about true crime, but I want to talk about movies and, actors or whatever. I wasn't even thinking about interviewing at the time.
Mm.
And he's like,
Yeah.
"So you want to do crime and entertainment?" And I'm like,
Mhm.
that sounds like a pretty good name. And, that got kind of rolling in the interviews. And the first
Mhm.
sit down interview I did was with Lilo Brancato from the Bronx Tale,
Yeah, yeah.
Lodro. Then I had Red Wimet on the show, and then it just kind of started snowballing, man. You know how it is. It's like anything. If you have a good presentation about yourself, word travels that you're a good dude, you're a nice
Yep.
interview. Some people are into, the pressing side of stuff. I try not
Mhm.
to, I want to get the story. I'll ask the questions, but I'm not there to anger, anybody. I mean, if there's something they want
Right.
to talk about, they talk about it. If they don't, they don't. But to the flip side of that, I've had guys on that kind of coincide with your channel. A lot of people from the
Mhm.
mob. I've had Gene Borello on. I've had Larry
Yep.
Mazza on, Bobby Luisi, Anthony Arlotta. That's just a few right off the top of my head. But to the flip side of that, I've interviewed people that's played mobsters, like in Sopranos. I've
Mhm.
had 4 or 5 people from the TV show Sopranos come on.
Yep.
Also had a number of like drug smugglers come on, people that were prolific smugglers, throughout their careers, be that marijuana or others.
Right.
And I've also got the flip side to the gangsters. I've interviewed law enforcement, people that's went undercover in the Hells Angels and the Outlaws.
Yeah.
ATF. Ignacio
Mhm.
Esteban was spent years in ATF. So you're going to get a little bit of everything from my channel. You're going to see well-known movie stars, well-known TV stars. You're going to see obviously the mob people that we
Right.
all know in this genre. You're going to, see some stories that maybe you don't know anything about. Con men. Matt Cox was a good one, and he's helped me out
Yep.
tremendously throughout my career, and he's got a great story. Counterfeiters. I mean, just a little bit of everything. I say this: if you go to my channel and you scroll through and you can't find something that interests you, then I think you got a problem. And it's not that I'm
Yeah.
interesting. Trust me, I don't think I'm that interesting, but the guests I have on are pretty interesting. You'll find something on there that really tickles your fancy, I'm sure.
For you, uh, being through this for what, 2 years? When did you start? What year, the
I'd say
channel?
it was 2022, I think. So a little over
Yeah.
2 years. I didn't
Yeah.
start doing video right off the bat. It was audio for a period of time. And
Mhm.
then I started with the videos.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a slow working in process, because I didn't have anybody to interview. I never thought I was going to interview people. I just thought I was
Yeah.
going to do an audio podcast and talk
Mhm.
about this, that, or the other. And, it kind of groomed in this. And I learned as I went. I mean, as I'm
Mhm.
sure a lot of people have noticed, if you go back to some of my first videos, the quality on
Mhm.
my cameras was real grainy. I didn't have a lot of banners and stuff up.
Right.
I had to learn all that. So as look at my very first interview and skip forward a year and then skip forward to now, you can notice a big quality difference as I've kind of learned
Mhm.
on the skills and interviewing skills as well. I was fresh
Sure.
to that as well. So you kind of learn as you go along, as I'm sure you've experienced as well.
Yeah. And I think the thing is your channel says what you do. And definitely important. A lot of channels, they have a name and you're wondering, well, what is this channel about? But
Yeah.
but your channel has a name, it tells you what you do.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
it encompasses it perfect, because the entertainment aspect can arrive from people that's, not only played mobsters on TV, but just bad guys in general. One
Yep.
of the more interviews that I have that I'm probably the most proud of, and
Hmm.
he was a huge star, and unfortunately he passed away. I think it was last year.
Hmm.
It's coming up on the year anniversary, or maybe it just passed. Was Tom Sizemore, and I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
anybody remembered him, from the late '90s, early 2000s. I mean, there wasn't a better actor. I mean, he was in Heat
Mm-mm.
with Robert De Niro and Al Pacino, Saving Private Ryan with Tom
Yes.
Hanks. He was in Pearl Harbor, Natural Born Killers. I mean, he was the guy. He
Yes.
just embodied those roles, and he had his struggles, with substance abuse, and we talked about that, and we talked about how that affected him, and he broke it down so well, James, how
Mm-hmm.
he described it. He's like, think about this. He's like, think about you're in a movie and you're shooting a shootout scene in the middle of the
Mm-hmm.
street with Al and Val Kilmer and Robert De
Mm-hmm.
Niro and Michael Mann's directing, and it's like one of the best shootout scenes ever, probably the best shootout scene ever in cinema history. And he's
Right.
like, when you're on that, you have a natural high that no drug will give you. He's like,
Hmm.
you don't need drugs for that. The doing it is the high. He said, but when that movie wraps, you've got a year, 2 years before it comes out, before it gets to actual theaters.
Mm-hmm.
You may have a job lined up, you may not.
Mm-hmm.
So there may be a
Right.
6 to 8 month gap where you're not doing anything. So
Right.
what is going to get you to that level that movie did? And he said that's where the drugs would come into play. But he was like, the second I got a movie, he said I could put them down. I could just drop
Wow.
it and go right back into it. He's like, but that was what was the addiction to him, was just that high. How can you keep, that adrenaline pumping, that high, that euphoria if you're not doing a movie? And that was how he explained it. And he said Robert De Niro came to his house and basically
Hmm.
took him to rehab. And he's like, I'll put it like this. He said, Robert De Niro, he calls him Bob, but he said, Bob De Niro is a
Hmm.
better friend than he is an actor. And he said, you know how good he is as an actor. So that just, should be able to speak volumes.
Wow. Yeah, and then my understanding is that you did the interview or you posted the interview not too long before you passed away, right?
Yeah, it was a few months.
Yeah.
I don't know if I was his last or not. I don't think I was his very last, but he couldn't have done many. I think I posted it around Thanksgiving, and then I want to say
Mhm.
he died the following year
Yeah.
around March or April or somewhere around in there. It wasn't
Mm.
long. It was a span of maybe 3 or 4 months, and then crazy enough, full circle. I recently had a guy on who starred in a movie that just come out, Saint Michael of the City,
Yeah.
Adam Ratcliffe, and which I
Yes.
think you had him on too, didn't
Yeah,
you?
I had him on, great guy. Yep.
Okay, so he was doing the documentary Saving Sizemore.
Yes, he
And the
was.
movie that Tom was telling me about while we were
Mhm.
speaking, and Tom told a lot of great stuff, man. I'll tell you a Gotti story in a minute, but
Yeah.
he was so excited. He was telling me about this role, and he's like, "Wait," he said, "I really think this is gonna be what's gonna put me back in the fold, man." And he told me the synopsis of it. Come to find out, it was the movie he was doing with Adam. They were shooting Saving
Oh.
Sizemore while he was doing the interview with me. Like, I shot the interview to that dude, and I'm like, "Here's when we did it." He's like, "Yeah, that was right along the time frame that we were working together." And so
Oh, wow.
I was kind of part of intertwined in that. And he
Yeah.
played Gotti in Witness
Mhm.
to the Mob,
Yes.
which was directed by Robert De Niro. And
Mhm.
I think he said they put him in a fat suit because they wanted to have him a little bit of weight, but he said he didn't like the way the fat suit was, so he actually
Mhm.
gained weight for the role. I think he said he gained the weight for the role. Um,
Yeah.
But either way, he got a bunch of surveillance tapes of the Gambinos around the Ravenite,
Mhm. Right.
like 20 hours. And
Mhm.
he said he was able to listen to all that, kind of get a feel for how these guys talk. And he was
Yeah.
actually able to talk on the phone to John. And
Mm.
he was talking to him and he was like, he said, John said, Tom, like, when's this movie coming out? And he was like, well, I don't know, Mr. Gotti. It could take a year, a year and a half. It
Mhm.
just kind of depends. Scheduling, production is kind of out of my hands. I'm just really the actor. And he's like, do me a favor. He said, don't fuck it up. He said, well, I'll do my absolute best, Mr. Gotti. I promise you. And he's like, don't do your best. Do better than that. He's like, then he
Oh,
hung the phone up.
wow.
So,
Oh my gosh.
and he said that
Oh,
even then, like, he was still claiming that, I don't know why they're doing all this. Cosa Nostra doesn't exist. It's something the government
yeah.
put up. And,
Right.
it was even at that point, man, love him or hate him or
Mhm.
think of him what you will. Think of what he done was the mafia was, the downside or whatever, however you want to do it.
Mhm.
It doesn't get more true gangster than John Gotti, in my
No.
opinion. Um,
No, I'm totally with you on that 'cause, yeah, he was Cosa Nostra to the end, you know?
yeah, that was
And
his famous line in that movie, Cosa Nostra till I die.
something I wanted to get your thoughts on, and something that I have to deal with in this genre is one of the biggest points of contention in the mob genre is who you bring on. And
Yeah,
so you'll have content creators that will bring on informants, and then you have those that would never bring on an informant. And I know that you've brought on both. You brought
yeah,
on people that have been an informant, and then others that haven't. And so I know that recently you've done Gene Borello, Andrea Giovino. And so, what do you say to those people that would be critical of you for bringing on and platforming informants?
well, there's a saying, and I can't remember. I like to give credit when I can, but you see
Hmm.
so many things you can't remember exactly where you heard it. But there was a saying that I seen that I absolutely loved, and it's better to create something and be criticized than to create nothing and criticize others.
Hmm.
So this is my show. This is crime and entertainment. And to put it
Hmm.
bluntly, I'll have on here really whoever the hell I want. And I'll have on whoever I find is interesting. And that's the beauty of it. I'm not, obviously I'm not, financed or financially backed by anybody. I don't have anybody telling me you can't talk to this guy, you can't talk to that guy. So I don't have a problem bringing on people that have cooperated because for years, and I said this, and I think I told this to Lee one of the first times I ever came on his show, like it or not, that's where you're getting the bulk of your information. You
Hmm.
don't have to agree with what they did, but the information largely is coming from them. Outside of Joey Merlino, you don't really have a guy that was heavily involved with organized crime that's going to come on YouTube. And even he's not really, he's very vague at what he
Hmm.
says. And we all know why. We all know why he's vague.
Right. Right.
So there's no need to go down that rabbit hole. Anybody that has any kind of, half ass sense about this whole genre knows why he can't
Hmm.
be, but he wants to. He
Hmm.
wants deep down. He
Yeah.
wants to.
Yeah.
And I think I heard Jeff Nadeau say it today. It was the best. Part of what's the point of being a big time gangster if nobody knows it? And in
Yeah.
Joey's case, I think people know him. His reputation precedes him, but he still can't give you all the information that he has. If Joey had immunity to talk, the stories that man had would probably set the internet on fire.
Yeah.
But these other guys like Gene and John A. Light and Anthony Arlotta and Anthony Ruggiano, these guys have made the decision to cooperate, so they don't have to hide anything. They don't have to, they don't have to be worried about anything. They have free reign to talk about it. And one thing that I've learned too, even in their niche, in the actual cooperators world, you have people that don't like each other and don't necessarily
Hmm.
get along. It's all about, I think, the way you handle it as a host. And I think
Hmm.
you do a great job at that. You don't
Thank you.
hold anything against any one person. And
Right.
I asked Gene this one time. I was like, all right, so Gene, you don't necessarily think highly of Andrea, and John is good friends with Andrea.
Hmm.
John doesn't necessarily like Sammy. You just went out and spent some time with Sammy in Arizona. Does that cause any sort of inner conflict?
Hmm.
Is John mad because you went out there with Sammy, or you mad at John because he went and met Andrea? And he's like, no. And that's because at the end of the day, it's business. It's
Mhm.
good business. If you don't like somebody, that's fine. You don't have to like them. But I'm not going to hold anything against anybody for having somebody on that, I may not agree with. It's not my place to judge what any of these people did. If they cooperated, they cooperated. If they did, they didn't. I'm not going to have to answer for their sins at the end of the day.
Right.
So, those are the ones that, tell the stories. And that's the biggest thing is, you got Joey and you got Chris Colombo, and Chris Colombo largely he talks about sports and stuff like that. Obviously, his father's a very known figure, in that world, an important man, especially to the Italian American Civil Rights League. And so
Yeah.
being able to talk with him was nothing short of amazing. I've had
Mhm.
the luxury of actually going to his home, meeting him. He's a
Yeah.
gentleman.
Yeah.
Meeting his son. I interviewed his son. Also, the guy that does his podcast with him, Anthony Conover.
Mhm.
And, he invited me up there to his home. I drove up, he fed me, went down, seen his pool table where he does his podcast. I mean, he was a really nice guy, really nice time. And obviously the episode that we did, he had some choice words for some guys, in the genre.
Yeah.
But I don't think if tomorrow, if Sammy the Bull said, "Hey, Wade, we're going to do an interview," I
Mhm.
don't think Chris would get mad at me for going and doing that interview,
Right.
because me and him's already done one. I don't think he's that type of guy. Chris isn't going to go do an interview with him. That I can tell you. But I
Yeah.
don't think he would say, "Wait, do what's best for you." That I think that's his
Right.
view on it. Yeah, I don't want to speak out of school, but I think that's what he would say.
Yeah. Who is John? You'd mentioned John.
Eli.
John Alite.
Yeah,
Alite.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of Johns. So,
Yeah, yeah,
and
there's
then,
a lot of nonsense.
so do you feel, and then I guess kind of a follow up to that, do you feel as a content creator, we have a responsibility for who we bring on to the show, or is it more of it's up to the viewer to make that decision if they're going to watch or not?
I leave it up to the viewer. Like I said, it's not my job as a content creator to judge what a decision that somebody made when they were facing life in prison.
Right.
Um, it's my job to bring out the story, to get the facts of what happened, what led to this, what were you facing, what made you do it. I ask those questions. I say, all right, what was the deciding factor? Because we all know, at least from what we've been told, and some people detail it more than others. When you take that oath, that's supposed to be the end all be all. You're not
Right.
supposed to betray it. If you got to go take 30 years, you take 30 years. And we've heard that a lot of the people, once they go to jail, they're not taken care of the way they're supposed to be taken care of. They're not promised the things that they're supposed to be, getting while they're in there. The family's not being taken care of. We hear this all the time. And, I can't say if it's true. I've got no affiliation with that life whatsoever. I live in South Carolina. As far as I know, there's no
Yeah.
mob activity going on down there that I'm aware of.
Mm-mm.
But I do notice that there is a theme with guys in there and that have cooperated of that people weren't holding up their end of the bargain. Um, is that a good enough reason for them to do what they did? Again, it's not my place. It's just my job as the content creator to put out the story. It's the viewers, their opinion of whether they agree, they don't agree. And let's face it, James, half the people on there saying, "Oh, well, I wouldn't have ratted and I wouldn't have did the," they probably couldn't do a weekend in jail,
Right.
let
Yeah.
alone facing 30, 40 years. And some of these guys on top of that did do serious time before they cooperated.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. That's
so,
true.
and that's just that's something I'll leave up to the viewer. And people can have those feelings about informants and say they won't platform them, but at the same time, there's certain content creators. I don't really like to get into naming names, but there's some guys on there that'll have an informant on and be totally fine with it. And then the next week they bash every other informant. And really, if you
Yeah.
want to know the truth about it, it's just because they won't go on their shows. That's what it boils.
Yeah.
That's what it boils.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of jealousy. There's a lot of, I don't think it's like that in all genres, but
Yeah,
especially you get into this mob genre niche, there
yeah,
seems to be that dynamic that can be difficult.
yeah. And to me, if you make a channel strictly on bashing cooperators,
Hmm.
you've already made yourself a ceiling. Specifically, I don't want people to think, well, he's talking about Joey. Joey's bashing rats in general, but Joey has something else. Joey is interviewing people and great people like Pete Rose and people
Hmm.
like that. I mean, that was a fantastic interview. Ric
It was very
Flair,
good.
So Joey understood that you can't have a show strictly off just talking about informants. That's not going to have a very long shelf life. You've got to put something else with it. And so with that, he's bringing on guests that are mainstay names like Ric Flair, like the kid from that, where his dad was involved with the mob and he bought him the hockey team,
Yeah.
Delonte,
Yeah.
Ric Flair, Pete Rose, those kinds of names. So they understand the business aspect of it. Some of the more smaller channels, like you can't build at least in my opinion, you can't build a successful channel off that. Is everything you do is bashing cooperators. The logic in that, to me, I would much rather watch you, do an interview with Michael Francis, ask him the questions that maybe nobody else has. Because I watch some of these people, even some of the news people, they'll ask some of the questions, but you can tell they don't know the nuances that, a James Proctor might ask, or I myself might ask, or someone, another Jeff Nadeau may
Mhm.
ask, somewhere like that. So I like, when those guys go on our shows and everybody's got a different perspective. You're going to ask different questions. I'm going to ask different questions. Jeff's going to ask different questions. So it's like, even though it's the same person, you can still get three different interview styles.
Yeah, and that's definitely true, and and that's one of the things. Like when I brought Michael on, I wanted to ask questions that he hadn't been asked, and that's hard to do because
Yeah.
he's had thousands of interviews, he's on the road, he does questions answers, but what I could say about him is he is very accessible. So he
Yeah.
allowed me to ask any question that I wanted, and um, my take is to be a gentleman, try to get the information,
Right.
make it where he's comfortable, and I felt that we were successful in that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, 100%. And that's one, when I have people on, for instance, we spoke earlier about Andrea Giovino,
yes.
which I went on her show as well not too long ago. I think
Hmm.
it's on her channel, and told a little bit about my story. So, folks want to check that out. It's over there. But I had her on and I'm like, look, a lot has been said about, the scenes or the parts that you had in the Get Gotti documentary. I said, I'm going to ask you about a few of those and your
Yeah.
cooperation, or what you say was not cooperation, but what reads much differently. I said, I'm asking you about that. And she told me, she said, Wade, you ask me anything you want to ask me. Nothing is off limits. Whatever you want, you shoot it to me. And I'm like, okay.
Hmm.
And so we ran through, we got to that point and she said it was a lot of it was taken out of context. There's no doubt Andrea was involved in some things in the street. She was arrested for it. So she's not
Hmm.
making up that she was involved. So when she said, we were sitting around the table talking about murders, she said, oh, I said that, but I didn't say it as in the context of I was sitting there with John Gotti at a table, which we all know would have never happened. They're not
Right.
going to let people that are not really, really in that inner side. They wouldn't even let some people in the mob sit in on those conversations,
No.
let alone, somebody that was dating somebody that was close to it. So we knew that wasn't true, but the way Netflix edited it together made it seem like she's saying we were sitting there talking about it together, when in actuality, she was talking about it with the people that she was dealing with. So that is the power of Hollywood and editing. And so
Yeah.
we cleared that up. Then I'm like, all right, well, now it's, there's big differences of opinion on your cooperation. And I read her verbatim something that I pulled from a news article. And the news article stated it was like the feds made Andrea an offer she could not and did not refuse. Once she
Hmm.
took it, she said, I'm going to use what I know and protect those babies. And she was put into, her husband, kids were moved to a different location. It didn't say Witsec, and that's what I was kind of curious about. The reason why
Hmm.
she couldn't enter Witsec is because she had a kid with another guy. And so he would have either had to given up the rights, I think it how it is, which he wouldn't have done. So she could not legally enter Witsec because she had a kid with another marriage. Otherwise, that man would have had to given up all rights and let the kid go, be. So she did get relocated, but it wasn't Witsec. And
Not with Sec. Hmm.
she said, when I was arrested, she said, I was basically a pawn. They wanted her. I don't know if it was her husband or boyfriend at the time, John Fogerty, who was a big, narcotics dealer. And I think it
Hmm.
was her brother, if I'm not mistaken. Those
Yes.
were the big fish they were after. So they used her to get to them, which is not an uncommon thing. That
Yeah, that's
happens
a
in law
common
enforcement.
theme. Yeah.
Yeah, law enforcement quite a bit. And she openly said, she said, wait, if they'd have said, you know what, we'll get them eventually. You're going down. If I'd had to cooperate to walk and stay out and raise my kids, I would have done that. So
Hmm.
she openly said what she would have done. Now she didn't have to do it. They wound up saying, okay, you let her go. We'll take the rap, which is, I think, a man's place to do in that world if you were all in it together. And
Yeah.
if you're that deep in it and you have the opportunity to take the sentence and let your wife walk and or girlfriend and raise the kids, you do that. And that's what he did. And she didn't wind up having to do it. Now, do
Yeah.
you, and that's the thing that I think we have to separate. She was prepared to do it, but she didn't have to. So because she sat down and talked with him and she was prepared to do it, do you label her that? She didn't actually do it. And that's where everybody has to draw the line. And that's where things are. I've heard the term push the goalpost back. People
Hmm.
say that, depending on who, as far as I know, and with your interview with Michael, no actual mob guys done time was testimony. So did he rat? Did he turn into on a mob? Did he break that bond or that oath? It just all depends on how deep you want to get into it. If you want to get technical, admitting to anything at all is against the rules. So the stand-up guy out of this whole genre, Joey Merlino, is technically breaking the rules by even admitting the existence. Depends on how deep you want to look at it.
Yeah, I know even Joey got some criticism for going on Vlad TV. Vlad has saying like 6 million subscribers. I mean, that interview got, millions of views. And so people were critical because he had interviewed, I'm sorry, that Vlad had interviewed informants. But then when you look at the brand of Joey, it's like they made a decision. 'Cause that's a lot of viewers that he's able to put his brand in front of that he wouldn't have been able to otherwise. And so,
The
I
bottom
think
line
that,
speaks loudest.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And so I think that's what some people have to look at in this. So,
That's what
anyways,
people have to really look at, is
hmm,
if Joey, which I believe 100% without a doubt, I believe he's out of anything criminal.
right,
I don't think he's got it. Does he still know people that's involved in that world? I'm sure he does. He stays in Philadelphia or Florida. He's got to know.
yeah,
He grew up around that life.
yeah,
To say he doesn't know anybody that's still
oh
involved would
yeah,
be crazy.
yeah,
But as far as him being hands on with it, I seriously doubt it.
yeah.
I
I don't
think
think
he's
so
getting
either.
an idea now of, hey, we can use this to make money legally, and the government can't do a thing to me. I think that's his mindset now. He's like, I'll rub everything in there as much as I can. I'll rub it
Hmm.
in their face and make money off of it. And going on Vlad was a money decision,
Yeah, it was.
hands down. And because Vlad has platformed a bunch of people that were informants. So to do that and to catch flack, you have to understand there's one reason Joey did that. And that was for
Hmm.
whatever the size was that of the check that he got cut, which I would imagine was probably pretty large. And on top of
Yeah,
that, then you're letting this whole group of people that may not know who Joey is see him. Oh, I'm gonna go check this guy out. And then he's got his Patreon, and then it's going to that. And then it was right after that, he comes out with, Pete Rose interview. And I mean, it was very strategic of how they
yes,
did it. And so, and then he went on Mark Gagnon. Did you watch that one?
I hadn't watched that one yet.
I like that one better than the Joey one, or
Really,
the Vlad one. Yeah,
Vlad.
I
Yeah,
like Mark's better than the Vlad interview.
yeah. I mean, Vlad to me is. I think he's one of those because he's mostly hip hop. But he does a little bit of everything, and
Yeah,
so I don't necessarily think that he's the most prepared for an interview. So
yeah,
that's one of the. I don't necessarily say it's a criticism. That's just the way he is.
yeah.
He's going to just kind of dig a little bit below the surface while other people take more of a deep dive into the interview. And
Yeah,
so,
and I'll give Vlad credit. There wasn't a lot he could do because, there's only so
mhm.
far you can go, and I don't know nothing about it. I don't know nothing about that.
I know
You
that's
know, when
what you're
that's
going to
when
get.
that's your reply, there's only so many places you can go.
Yeah.
And I can't knock Vlad either for butchering some of these names. I have
Oh,
trouble
I
butchering
know.
some of these names myself.
I
But
do too.
I think more than anything, that interview showcased that Joey can be very comical.
Yeah.
For whatever people may accuse him of being involved with or having something to do with or whatever. He's funny. I find him to be funny, and it was just
Yeah, I do too.
the way he was answering some of those questions. It was just I even joke around with my wife. I've been like, she'll say something about a guy that she knows has a reputation for partying or something like that, and I said, I think we're gonna go somewhere, and she'll kind of look at me, and I look back at her. I'm like, he's a good man. He's a good man. He's not gonna do nothing wrong.
Yeah, so I have a question. So you interviewed Gene Borello, and so I
Yes.
was maybe a couple of times, or maybe you have one interview, you kind of broke it into a couple of
I've
sections.
interviewed him twice. I interviewed him once back around December, was the first
Okay.
time I'd ever had him on. We kind of went through his story,
Yeah.
and then his most recent stint in prison when he was in there with Sam Freed. And then I just had him on for a second go round, where we kind of broke down. This is something that I like doing personally, breaking down mob movies compared to how the streets looked at the mob
Yes.
movies. Because there's nothing that I like better than saying, okay, this movie come out. What did the real people in the street think about it? What was their
Right.
take on it? What was different? What was off? And I like getting those takes. And I started that with Anthony Ruggiano, who's
Hmm.
Gene's cousin. And that's kind of what we followed. And the last one was Gene, and it's got good feedback. It's a little over 10,000, 11,000
Good.
views right now. The first one we did done great. It's like 73,000. It's my
That's
second
great.
highest rated video ever.
So what were your thoughts of Gene after interviewing him? Obviously you brought him back, so
Yeah.
that was one thing, but he had a lot of criticism, obviously for what he did, with violating his parole. And
Mhm.
so he had to go back. He had the situation, with his on and off again girlfriend. I
Yeah.
think that's what got him in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
But do you feel that and I know that he's going on, he went on Michael Francis. That's going to come out pretty soon. He actually went on Cinema Mills. And what do you think he's changed? What was your thoughts after interviewing him twice?
Well, and actually, I'll tell you this is a little tidbit. I've met him. I've actually met him personally,
Hmm.
a couple of weeks ago when I was in New York to do Andrea's show. I seen him that Friday night, and he posted a picture with Adam 22, who was
Hmm.
No Jumper podcast. People might know that, kind of like the same lines as Vlad.
Yeah.
And I knew Adam to be out of California, so I'm just thinking Gene's in California. So I'm like,
Hmm.
oh, that's cool. You met Adam, and he's like, yeah, I'm with Bobby Schmurder now, who's a famous rapper, and I'm just like,
Hmm.
oh, cool, man. And we didn't text anymore. I didn't think he was in New York. The next day, I get out of doing Andrea's show, and he posts a short, and he's like, I'm in Manhattan eating Chinese food. And I'm like, you're in the city? And he's like, yeah. So we got together later that night, hung out. We was with another friend of mine that had done 22 years in prison for something he didn't do. Turns out
Hmm.
his lawyer, Gene knew his lawyer. His lawyer was tied in to the Bananos. They got tied in with something. He was doing something illegal. He went, I
Hmm.
want to say his name was Tommy. I can't remember the last name. You may know it or may have heard about it, but he
Yeah.
was a lawyer for a lot of those guys. He was key with Vinny, Gorgeous going to jail. And Tommy
Hmm.
basically had to enter WITSEC, and he was disbarred.
Hmm.
Andre, my friend, had him as a lawyer. And so those guys kind of hit it off together because they knew a lot of the same people. They had been in a lot of the same prisons. And Gene, to me, was a cool guy. I mean, I don't know him in that life. I
Right.
knew him from the interviewer aspect. He was the interviewee. We went out, we went to some clubs. He was a gentleman as far as I was concerned, but that wasn't anything in the street. I don't know how he was in the street. I don't know him from that way. I do think, me personally, that his eyes are set on, the bigger picture, trying to make some money, trying to stay out of
Hmm.
jail. Obviously, I don't think anybody desires to go to jail. That's not a place
Right.
you want to be.
No.
Um,
No.
Gene has just got that temper to where if somebody tries him, then his ability to hold back, I don't think is as strong as maybe some of the other people's.
Yeah.
But I think, as long as people don't come at him, I don't think he's going to go and specifically start anything to get himself thrown back in prison.
Yeah.
That's my opinion of it. And he didn't, when we went out, he was respectful for everybody. We actually met a group of ladies that were leaving the club as we were walking in. We struck up a conversation. As luck would have it, one of them was fixing to turn herself into federal prison 72 hours from that point. And so
Oh,
I
wow.
exchanged numbers with the girl. and done a podcast with her 2 days later and put it out on my show where by the time it aired, she was already in federal prison.
Oh, wow.
Conspiracy charge.
That's wild. So,
Yeah.
no, I mean, yeah, thanks for sharing that. And then, the other thing was, so I know that you've interviewed Gene, and so he's an informant, but on the side of non-informants, you interviewed Chris Colombo, and I have to admit that the interview that you did with him was one of the most entertaining videos I've seen. And were you surprised or taken back by what Chris said about Sal Polisi and Sammy the Bull? What did you think when all of that was going on?
I knew that he was gonna speak his mind.
Hmm.
Maybe not quite to the extent that he did,
Hmm.
but Chris is a very passionate guy. I wouldn't necessarily call him a man of few words, but he's a man of important words. So when he speaks, he's going to speak with conviction and passion.
Yeah.
And, he wasn't just some guy going off on a tangent. You could tell that the things that those people mentioned about him and about his father and about people that he knew personally, he took offense to that.
Yeah.
And it's one thing if it's true, you know, facts are facts. We can't help what facts are. But when it's not true, and people are fabricating stuff, especially about someone like his father, whom he loved dearly, that's going to bring a different side of a man who with any man, but
It would.
especially Chris. He's got a passion, for that. He holds his father in high regard, very high regard, as he should. And I knew it was going to be something. I didn't quite know it was going to turn into what it did, but it was a very, very good interview. And,
It was very good.
at
Yes.
the end of the day, I don't think he said anything that wasn't true. Some
Yeah.
of the things that, and I'm not in the business of bashing people, but as far as Sal, there was a lot of things that just didn't add up with Sal. And as content creator, you yourself know that you want to try to vet people as much as possible. I have a full-time job outside of this. I work 45 to sometimes 50 hours a week. I come home, I do this, I edit, I have to do all the stuff myself. I don't have a team helping me. It's hard enough trying to do this by yourself. I don't
Yeah.
have a private investigating squad to send out and backtrack and fact check everybody's story. So to a certain point, I have to rely on that they're going to come on and tell the truth because my listeners are going to do it. And they're going to let
Hmm.
me hear, but they're going to say, why would you put this guy? He's lying about this. They're going to do it. A lot of them have the time, not
Yeah.
knocking them. A lot of them have the time to go and fact check and do this. So it's kind of like I can bring them on. I can let the story, but I've never interviewed Sal because quite frankly, I didn't buy everything that he was saying. There's only
Yeah.
so many people one man can be connected to.
Yeah. One other guy, one last guy is Derek Galanis.
Yeah.
I hope I pronounced that right. So, what did you think about him? I've heard Jeff Nadeau and some other. I don't know that guy's backstory, but I've heard some people say that he's a fraud, and then others. I know he claims to be again being an associate. What did you think of him? Where was your position on Derek?
I mean, he obviously done time. He didn't claim to be with anybody that was like that massive. Some of these
Yeah.
guys that come out and I'll just use Anthony Raimondi for this
Right.
particular comparison. A lot of guys,
Yeah.
throw him a lot of flack because of the people that he says he was involved with and to what extent. So
Hmm.
he makes himself a big lightning rod by the people that he says he was involved in. Whether he was or whether he wasn't, I don't know. I wasn't around. That's not for me to decide. People can make their own assumptions. I personally, on a personal level, I like Anthony. I was with him
Hmm.
in Brooklyn. He drove me around. He took me out to eat. But to hop back over to Derek, your original question, his story to me didn't seem that much inflated or that much in detail of that he was involved in something on such a mass scale
Hmm.
that it was a fabricated story. You know what I'm saying? It's like
Right.
it was obviously very interesting. With the Cherry Hill Gambinos, I didn't know much about them, more of the Tommy Gambino, more so than anyone else. So, a little bit harder for me to dig into as far as factual because I didn't know a ton about those guys myself. But to
Right.
me, it's like, why go to the extent to make up a story about that. He obviously did do time. That's documented. He did write a
Mhm.
book. That's documented. Largely, he was more downing his own father, in the interview.
Yeah, I think that's what I was hearing was his father was, involved or something, in that,
And his father
so
tried to get him jammed up, so
mhm.
to me, it wasn't more so of an interview like, "Oh, I sat with this person and I was with this person and I dealt drugs with this person." It wasn't like that. So I tend to put him on the more side of I believe a lot of what he was saying. And that's a lot of thing too, man. Sometimes just because you can't verify it doesn't necessarily mean that the person is lying. There
Right.
was another guy recently that I actually met him when I was in California here recently. I actually went to California and I was a guest on Michael's show and then also
Mhm.
on Cinnamills. Now these haven't come out
Yes.
yet. They're coming out
Mike
fairly soon.
Francis is who, so you're going to be on Michael Francis, you
Yeah.
already interviewed, and
Yeah.
so, yeah, but I just want people to understand who you're referring to with Michael.
Yeah, Michael Francis's show. It was an excellent interview. Being that I was already out there, I wound up hooking up with Cinnamills and was
Mhm.
on their program as well. So both of them should be coming out sometime within the next couple months, I'm assuming. So keep your eyes on that if you would.
Yes.
Um,
But what are your plans moving forward with the channel? I know you talked about that you'll have the interview. You're actually on Mills and you're actually on Michael Francis, and so that'll be coming out soon. But what are some of your plans moving forward with the channel for people to
uh,
look forward to?
Well, obviously, I'm gonna keep with the interviews. We typically drop one a week.
Okay.
Every now and then, if there's a hot topic or something that you kind of want to jump on, I'll throw one out in the middle of the week or something like that to kind of keep up with current events. But typically, it's a one week one episode a week drop on Sundays. I'm toying with the idea because I've never told my story on my channel. I've always told
Hmm.
my story on other people's channels, Matt Cox,
Yeah.
Concrete, Ian Big. Now, of course, we mentioned Michael Francis, Mills. I shared the story on there as well as with you and Lee. Um,
Right.
so I've never talked about my story on my channel. So what I'm actually trying to do, I'm in the midst of putting this all together right now, is getting in with one of the lead forensics investigators that was on my case, as well as my lawyer and some other people that were involved. And I want to tell my story, but as I'm telling it, I'm going to mix in some clips from them and their perspective of it, because that'll add another layer that even somebody that has seen my story on your program or whoever's program, they didn't get to see this part of it. They didn't get to see what the investigator thought when he come there and what he did to prove this. And so I want to try to put that together and maybe do it in a series, maybe a 3 or 4 part series, depending on how long
Yeah.
it runs, and to give people a little bit better of an idea of what went on and what happened. Because so many people, James, had no idea. I was in this game for probably close to 2 years before anybody had a clue. And it was a shock. They were like, "What? That was going on the whole time?" I had no clue. And I'm like, "Well, I couldn't really talk about it." The lawyer said,
Right.
"Look, I don't care what you do, but you can't talk about your stuff." And so
Hmm.
it was a shock to a lot of people. And, more than anything, it's just a cautionary tale to try to tell people that, look, you can do everything the right way and you can still wind up in a pinch. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the next project that I'm working on. It probably won't, be something that would be fully ready to be released until probably next year.
Okay.
Getting it all done because I want to do it well. I want to do it, high end cameras,
Yes.
right kind of setting. I don't want it to be nothing I just throw together. But other than that, just keep checking out the channel, man. We've got great guests lined up. We've got some more people from movies that you would recognize, TV shows, and then we just kind of keep rolling, man. We're getting to the point now where we're getting reached out to from people to be on the program, and I think
Good.
that's kind of that point to where you aspire to be as a content creator. When you're building it from the ground up, it's you doing all the legwork, running all over the place, trying to talk to this person and that person. When you start to get a little name value, people will come to you. And I've had a few people reach out to me that's wanted to come on and share their story. And they've been amazing, been
Good.
amazing guests. I had a guy that was a former sheriff in Ohio that wound up, being hooked on pain pills and got
Hmm.
arrested and was in jail while he was still the sheriff. They arrested him and put him in jail.
Oh, wow.
He
Mm.
done, I think 4 or 5 years in prison and got out. Now he's, he travels around and he tells people, warns people about the addiction of opioids.
Mm.
So, there's always a feel good story at the end of most of our interviews.
just thank you for coming on. Please, everyone, check out Wade's channel. It's called Crime and Entertainment. And, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Anytime, James. Keep up the good work. You're doing a fantastic job, my friend.
Yep. Thank you so much.